The auction house buzzed with excitement as bidders raised their paddles, each hoping to claim a prized stallion. Among them sat a man who had already built his fortune in industries far removed from horses. He wasn't here for prestige or sport. He was here on instinct. Something about this particular horse, a lean, unassuming creature overlooked by wealthier bidders, had caught his eye. The price was modest, almost too low for an auction of this caliber. But when the gavel slammed down and the deal was sealed, he had no idea that his purchase would soon make him richer than he had ever imagined. He didn't know much about horse racing, nor did he care for show jumping or breeding. What intrigued him was a whisper, a gut feeling that told him this horse was different. He had made his money by spotting potential where others saw nothing, and he trusted that skill more than anything. As he led the horse out of the auction house, he noticed the skeptical glances from other buyers, some even smirked. This wasn't the kind of horse people fought over. But that was fine. Let them laugh. He had learned long ago that the greatest opportunities often looked like mistakes in the beginning. The first few weeks were uneventful. The horse was healthy, but there was nothing extraordinary about it. No record-breaking speed, no legendary pedigree, no remarkable agility. His trainer, an old friend with years of experience in the field, had little to say other than, "It's a good horse, but not a great one." That should have been the end of the story. The millionaire could have sold it off, taken the minor loss, and moved on. But something still nagged at him. It wasn't until one evening, long after the stable hands had gone home, that he saw it the moment that changed everything. The horse, left alone in the training yard, began to move in a way that defied explanation. It wasn't running, not exactly. It wasn't practicing any kind of trained routine. Instead, it was reacting, predicting. As if it knew what was going to happen before it did. A branch cracked somewhere in the distance, and before it could fall, the horse had already sidestepped. A gust of wind sent a tarp flying, and before it could land, the horse had positioned itself out of its path. The movement wasn't just fast, it was impossible. At first, he thought he was imagining it. A trick of the light, an illusion. But the more he watched, the more undeniable it became. This wasn't luck or intuition. This was something else. Something that shouldn't have been possible. He had seen animals with sharp instincts before, but this was beyond that. It was almost as if the horse could sense the future, reacting to events before they happened. He needed proof. Over the next few days, he set up small tests, careful not to raise suspicion. He placed obstacles in different locations, rearranged furniture in the training area, and even had his staff create distractions. Every time, the horse moved as if it already knew what was coming. It wasn't guessing. It wasn't reacting after the fact. It was acting before the event took place, as if it could see into the next moment. The realization hit him like a freight train. If this ability could be understood, controlled, harnessed, it was worth more than any racehorse, more than any breeding champion. This was something else entirely. And if he played his cards right, it could make him wealthier than he had ever been. But the world doesn't reward those who hold on to secrets for too long. And as he dug deeper into the mystery of the horse's ability, others started to notice. Some were merely curious. Others were far more dangerous. The days that followed were a whirlwind of discovery, secrecy, and an unsettling sense of paranoia. The millionaire knew he had stumbled onto something far greater than he had initially imagined. And with that realization came a new challenge, keeping it hidden until he could figure out how to use it to his advantage. He spent hours with the horse, watching its every movement, testing its uncanny ability in ways that grew riskier each time. It never failed. No matter what unexpected event he threw at it, the horse was always a step ahead. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was something much more precise. The trainer started to notice the strange obsession growing in his old friend. He had seen wealthy men become fixated on rare artifacts, stocks, businesses, but never on a horse that, to most, seemed utterly unremarkable. One evening, after yet another round of tests that made little sense to an outsider, the trainer finally confronted him. "What exactly are you trying to prove?" The millionaire hesitated for a moment, debating whether to share the truth. But he wasn't ready. "Not yet. Just a hunch," he finally said, brushing off the concern. "But hunches don't keep a man awake at night. They don't make him check over his shoulder every time he steps into the stable." He had never been a superstitious man, never believed in things that couldn't be explained. But this was different. He had built his empire by finding value where others didn't. And now, for the first time in his life, he was in possession of something that didn't fit into any existing category of wealth. This was bigger than real estate, bigger than stocks, bigger than anything he had ever touched. But he didn't know how to control it. Then came the first sign that someone else had noticed. It was small, almost insignificant at first. A stable worker mentioned seeing a stranger near the property's edge. A man in a dark coat, standing just beyond the fence line, watching. A coincidence, perhaps. But then another sighting. Different day, different time, same man. The millionaire dismissed it at first, but the feeling wouldn't leave him. He had dealt with competitors before, people who wanted a piece of what he had built. But how could anyone possibly know about the horse's secret? Had someone seen something? Was he being watched? His concerns grew when a high-profile horse buyer, one known for acquiring animals at absurd prices, suddenly expressed interest in his recent purchase. The offer came in through a mutual acquaintance, casual but persistent. "I hear you picked up something interesting at the auction," the buyer had said over the phone. "Name your price." But there was no price. Not for this. When he refused, the buyer didn't argue. Instead, there was a pause, a silence that stretched just a little too long. "That's a shame," the voice finally said before hanging up. That was when he knew this was no longer just about a discovery, it was about survival. Determined to learn more, he brought in an expert, a specialist in equine behavior, a former researcher who had spent years studying animal instincts and cognition. She was skeptical at first, treating his claims with the same polite disbelief that scientists often reserved for stories of the impossible. But skepticism faded the moment she saw the horse in action. She conducted her own tests, changed variables, ruled out everything that could be ruled out. And yet, the answer remained the same. This horse was anticipating events before they happened. Not reacting. Not responding. Predicting. The possibilities were endless. If such an ability could be replicated, studied, understood, it could change everything. Racing, sports, investments, security, even military applications. And yet, with every door of opportunity that opened, another question loomed in the background. Why? How was this possible? And if he had found it by accident, who else might be looking for something like this on purpose? Then came the break-in. It was quick, precise, the work of someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Nothing of value was taken, no cash, no expensive equipment. Just files, notes, the results of his tests. The horse remained untouched, but the message was clear. He was no longer the only one playing this game. With tension growing, he knew he had to make a choice. Keep the horse and guard its secret with everything he had? Or cut his losses, disappear, and let someone else deal with whatever storm was coming? But walking away had never been his style. And something told him that even if he tried, whoever was watching wasn't going to let him go so easily. The break-in changed everything. Up until that moment, the millionaire had believed he was the only one who knew the horse's secret, that he held a golden opportunity in his hands, one he could exploit at his own pace. But now, he realized he had been playing catch-up all along. Someone else had been ahead of him, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The theft of his notes wasn't random. It was a warning. And the worst part? He still had no idea who was behind it. Paranoia settled in like an unwanted guest. Security cameras were installed overnight, guards were hired, and his staff was given strict orders no one came near the stables without his permission. But even as he tightened his grip, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had already lost control. The horse was still his, still standing in that same stall, but for how much longer? Whoever had broken in hadn't taken it. That meant they didn't just want the horse, they wanted to understand it first. And that meant they weren't done yet. The researcher he had brought in grew uneasy, sensing that this was bigger than she had signed up for. She had spent years in labs studying behavior under controlled conditions. But this wasn't science anymore. This was something else. "You don't understand what you have," she told him one night, voice low, cautious. "This isn't just about a talented animal. If people are willing to break in just to steal research, it means they're after something much bigger than money." That same evening, a package arrived at his estate. No return address. Just a plain envelope inside a brown box. The kind of thing he normally wouldn't give a second glance, except for the fact that it had been placed inside his locked office. Someone had been inside again. Someone had wanted him to find this. With steady hands, he tore it open. Inside were photographs. Blurry, low quality, but clear enough to make his stomach drop. Images of the horse, but not in his stables. These were older, taken before he had even bought it. A different facility, a different handler, but the same horse. And in the margins of one of the photos, a handwritten note, "You weren't supposed to have it." The words sent a chill down his spine. Had he unknowingly stepped into something far bigger than an auction? He had assumed this horse was just an overlooked anomaly, a hidden gem he had been lucky to find. But these pictures suggested something else entirely. This horse had been watched long before he came into the picture, which meant someone had lost it. And now they wanted it back. His mind raced with possibilities. Government research? A private project gone wrong? A breeding experiment? Theories spun through his head, each one more unsettling than the last. If this was the product of some kind of controlled program, how had it ended up at an open auction? Had someone deliberately placed it there, hoping it would go unnoticed? Or had it escaped from whoever had been trying to control it? Before he could dwell on it any further, his phone rang. Unknown number. He stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Silence on the other end. Then, a voice calm, deliberate, unmistakably aware of the fear it was causing. "You have something that belongs to us." The line went dead before he could respond. He stood frozen, fingers still gripping the phone, heart pounding in his chest. He had spent years negotiating high-stakes deals, facing down powerful figures. But this was different. This wasn't a business rival trying to outmaneuver him. This was something else. And then, as if the night hadn't already shattered every illusion of safety he had left, one of his newly installed security alarms tripped. The stable. He ran before he could think, sprinting toward the barn with his guards close behind. The doors were already ajar when he arrived, the lock hanging uselessly from its latch. Inside, the stalls were untouched except for one. The horse's stall stood open, empty. Footsteps in the distance. A shadow disappearing into the tree line. He didn't stop to consider the risk he chased. The forest loomed ahead, the wind cutting through the trees as he pushed forward. Whoever had taken the horse wasn't just escaping. They were leading him somewhere, and he was running straight into the trap. Branches snapped under his feet as he sprinted through the dense forest, the darkness swallowing everything but the silhouette ahead. The figure moved fast, too fast for someone leading a horse. But when he got close enough to see past the shifting shadows, his breath caught in his throat. The horse wasn't being dragged or forced. It was running on its own, willingly, as if it knew exactly where it was going. And the person beside it? They weren't holding a rope or reins. They were just keeping pace, moving as if they had done this before. The realization hit him like a hammer. This wasn't a theft. This was a return. The chase didn't last much longer. A clearing opened ahead, and in the middle of it stood a vehicle, large, unmarked, doors already open, as if expecting an arrival. He pushed himself harder, ignoring the burning in his legs, but just as he was about to close the distance, the horse stopped. Not in panic, not in exhaustion. It simply turned, looked at him, and for the first time, he felt like it was making a choice. The figure beside the horse stepped forward, finally revealing themselves in the dim light. A woman, older, her expression unreadable, but not unfamiliar. He had seen her before, one of the handlers in those photographs. The ones from before he had even known this horse existed. "You were never supposed to have it," she said, her voice steady. "But you figured it out, didn't you?" His fists clenched, every instinct telling him to demand answers, to fight for the animal he had risked everything for. But the way she looked at him, there was no hostility, only inevitability. She had been waiting for this moment. She had known it would come. "What is it?" he asked, finally voicing the question that had haunted him for weeks. "How does it know?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she ran a hand along the horse's mane, the kind of touch that spoke of years, not days. Then, finally, she said, "Not everything needs to be explained to be real. But if you need a word for it, call it perception. A level of awareness we barely understand." The answer wasn't what he expected. It wasn't a government experiment, not a lab creation, not a genetic anomaly. It was something simpler, yet more profound. This wasn't about science or business or power. This was about something that existed beyond what most people could grasp. "You saw it," she continued, her eyes locking onto his. "You saw what it could do. And that's why we can't let it stay with you." He wanted to argue, to tell her that he had bought this horse, that it was his. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had never owned it. No one did. He had just been a detour in a path already decided. He could hear his guards closing in behind him, but he knew they wouldn't be fast enough. The woman gave him one last look, something between gratitude and regret, before leading the horse toward the waiting vehicle. It stepped inside without hesitation, without fear. And before he could say another word, the doors shut, the engine roared to life, and just like that, they were gone. He stood there, staring at the empty space where the horse had been, where his greatest discovery had slipped through his fingers. His guards reached him moments later, demanding to know what had happened, if they should pursue. But he lifted a hand, stopping them. "No," he said quietly. "It's over." Days passed, and the weight of everything began to settle in. He had lost something that could have made him richer than he had ever imagined. And yet, as time went on, he realized he didn't feel like he had lost at all. He had seen something no one else had. He had witnessed something that defied logic, something that existed outside of human control. And for the first time in his life, he understood that not everything valuable was meant to be possessed. The calls stopped coming. The strange figures watching from the fence line disappeared. Whoever had been after the horse had gotten what they wanted. And he? He was left with a story no one would believe. But that was fine. Some things weren't meant to be explained. Some things were just meant to be seen and then let go.